I'm just wondering the motivations on both sides, where you have the CIA, who's a government agency, and they turn to the mafia to get the job done of an assassination plot of a major political figure that the U.S. government is trying to take out. What drives the motivations on both sides with the CIA turning to two mobsters? And then why would Roselli and Giancana want to engage in a CIA assassination plot who, are mob through and through? They're incredibly rich already, notoriously hate feds and spooks. Like what drives the motivations on both sides?
Well, a couple things. One is, as far as the mafia was concerned, bear in mind, in the late 50s, most Americans during the winter months, particularly if you lived in a place like New York or Chicago, most of those folks would go down to Havana rather than Las Vegas. Las Vegas was just getting off the ground after World War II. It really began after World War II, whereas Havana had already been established since the 1920s and 30s as this winter haven for people to go down. And that phrase, what goes on in Las Vegas stays in Las Vegas. Well, that was even more so in Havana. And so the mob made tons of money in Havana. And Johnny Roselli and Sam Giancana, they would often be down in Havana, particularly during the winter months, overseeing the casinos. So they lost tons of money. So when Fidel Castro took power, he threw out all of the U.S. businesses, including the casino owners. And so they were furious about that. They had lost tons of money. The government, the American government, had a different motivation. Their motivation was the fact that during the Cold War, there were two things that particularly happened in the late 50s. One was the Russians somehow figured out how to send a rocket into space. They were the first ones into space. That was really a startling surprise for the government, and particularly when they thought that maybe the Russians might be able to put a nuclear missile on top of that rocket. And so that was very threatening. But the other thing that happened is when Castro took power in Cuba, only 90 miles away from the United States, he relatively quickly allied himself with the Soviet Union, partly because the way we mishandled things with Castro. But fundamentally, Castro grew up, and his whole revolution really was a way of rejecting the U.S. involvement in Cuba. And so by aligning himself with the Soviet Union, he was willing to allow the Soviets to put missiles into Cuba. And that really prompted probably the closest we've ever come to World War III, which was the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. So that whole era, the motivation of the government to get rid of Castro and the motivation of the mob came together. And when the decision was made in the late stages of the Eisenhower administration, in other words, in late 59 and early 1960. In 1960, bear in mind, Eisenhower's still the president. The decision is made to saw off Castro, to get rid of him. And so they recruit through an intermediary, the two gangsters, Johnny Roselli and Sam Giancana.